Hello, everyone. First, I want to start by saying that I am so grateful to be here. This morning, we were able to take a tour of everything that's happening in special education in your country. I can only say, and I'll say this as a family member, as a parent, as a grandparent, as a child of persons with disabilities, that thank you for your work. Thank you for your tremendous work. Now, that was a pretty hard act to follow, especially when we're talking about policy. But on the other hand, it was the perfect act to follow when talking about policy, because that's what we're here for, right? To make sure that every human, every child has an opportunity to be who they are, who they want to be, and to belong. So thank you for a perfect setup to talking about policy. Because what is policy? Policy is what drives practice. Policy is what drives funding. Policy is important because it can open the door to have folks, to have our children, to have their families be able to live the life they need and want and picture for themselves. So thank you for that opening. Let's go ahead, and I'm the clicker. Okay. So today I'm tasked with talking about early intervention systems and related services for young children with disabilities as we are rolling it out at the present in the United States. My conversation today isn't to certainly say that we have figured it all out, if anything, but it is to say here's where we are. We'd love to know where you are, and we'd love to move forward together. Because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want this future for families. So I'll talk a bit about what we're figuring out and the direction we're moving right now. So right now, so much was discussed during the first presentation with Dr. Sophia, right? The things that we want for every child across the globe are the things that we've been talking about at the Division for Early Childhood for the Council for Exceptional Children. Now, we are an international division, but as you know, a lot of the things, the policies that are enacted are really stateside. So what we've been really working towards are high quality, I think we could all agree to that, inclusive and equitable services. So everything you heard this morning about what equity should look like for every child on this earth is a goal we should all have. Intersectionality is extremely important. Acknowledging that the children and families that we serve have multiple intersectionalities that perhaps make their opportunities much more challenging. And those are the places where policy is needed. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that high quality inclusion, and that's an important part. We've really been focusing on the high quality. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But it's the exception rather the expectation rather the exception, sorry. So again, really aligning with UNESCO's recommendations. We want to passionately advocate for the rights of children with disabilities and their families, and their families, and their families, to be included as full members of their communities. I was so excited to see this morning that this institution's working not only with children, with the professionals who serve them, with their families, specifically offering support to families who themselves experience a disability, for children who move into adulthood. Inclusion means that we are making a commitment to this child when they're born to open doors, to help with that sense of belonging until the day that they're no longer on this earth. So we really view that as part of high quality inclusion, a commitment for being alongside folks in community. I think when we talk about equity, what was talked about this morning too is also true. We've talked a lot about equity isn't just about disability. It's about disability and race. It's about where children live. It's about the resources that they have access to or don't have access to. It's about the resources that their families have access to or don't have access to. But more than that, equity is a mind shift for so many. Equity means that we truly think about what does it mean to say that everyone has what they need in order to succeed. It's more than words on paper. It's thinking about things like if a child doesn't read by second grade, the path forward is going to be a lot harder. So what's our responsibility from birth to second grade, which is early childhood, to assure that their path in high school and university and beyond is what it should be. We've also, for the last several years, really focused on equity as a policy mover. And so we put equity right alongside inclusion and believe that only with equity will true inclusion be achieved. But poor inclusion is the same thing as exclusion. So that focus on high quality means that we're going to talk about standards today, and we're going to talk about practices and what practices could and should look like. We're going to talk about listening to families and listening to practitioners and listening to other folks that are in the work. So along the road, the Division for Early Childhood came up with a new vision. And we consider all of you part of the Division for Early Childhood. It's not a member thing. It's I care about young children and families, therefore I am part of this family thing. So welcome to the DEC family, in case you weren't already here with us. But the vision that we invite folks to is to cultivate societies where inclusion and belonging are a lived reality for young children and their families across a diverse diaspora that embraces and celebrates and empowers them to be actively engaged in their communities. In other words, our vision was seen up here today. Our vision is everything that was spoken about this morning. We invite you, though you're already there, to continue moving forward on that vision. We are working on a joint policy statement on inclusion. Now, we currently have a policy statement, but it's got some age on it. It's from 2007. Our policy statement on inclusion brings in our partners from early childhood, focusing on the National Association for the Education of Young Children. So our general educators and our special educators working together to think about what does inclusion look like, not only for the children in classrooms and homes and the community, but for their families and for the professionals who serve them. So our position statement on inclusion in terms of practice formally really focused on making sure that communities and homes and schools were a place that children who needed extra supports and services could receive those extra supports and services. But it's been in place since 2007. We haven't moved the inclusion point since 2007. So those words alone are not doing the job, which is why we've been focusing on things like the equity statement and a mind shift and helping people understand inclusion isn't just a word. So in the new policy statement, we're listening to the folks that live inclusion. We're asking practitioners, professionals who serve children 0 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 8, 0 to 8. We're asking professionals, teachers, educators, other therapists who are with children and families every day, what does inclusion look like? What do services look like right now? And how far away are we? But that's not it. We're asking these folks, okay, so what are the barriers and why is that gap there? And they're telling us a lot that it has to do with policy. The 2007 statement, they know what inclusion is. They want to do inclusion. Since 2007, we haven't given the tools to enact the policy. So it's really bringing up the fact that funding barriers need broken down. Pre-service needs to be strengthened so that people really understand what inclusion truly is. And anyone who's in the life of a child, 0 to 8, understands what inclusion is. So we've been working on that, and we've heard that from our professionals. But we're also talking to families. We're talking to families who have children who are in the 0 to 8 space. We're talking to families who have children that have moved out of the early childhood space. And we're asking them, what do you think about inclusion? And the resounding answer so far is, of course, they want their children to be included in the spaces and places that all of the other children in their community are included. However, to this point, they've not seen high-quality inclusion. So they're worried about that. They're worried that their children won't receive the type of services and supports they need in order to truly be included. And so some of those parents are telling us, if I have to choose between inclusion and my child receiving adequate supports and services, I'm going to have a hard time choosing inclusion. What we hear that saying is every human being that touches and teaches a child needs to understand more about supporting all intersectionalities. Because we hear it more from our families that are least represented, our families that have more intersectionality, families that are high poverty, families that are of color, families that are LGBTQ. And so what we're hearing is, what we've heard often in this world is our policy is not matching our practice. And until our policy matches our practice, families aren't ready to trust us yet. And I'll tell you, as a grandparent, as a parent, I understand that. So we're working really hard with this inclusion statement to close that gap. And we're looking to others, and we're looking at the work all of you do and other countries do about how to really actualize inclusion. So we're super excited about this. We hope that we can do something different. It's aligned with our 2 federal agencies putting out an inclusion statement together. I think it's been 3 years ago now, but the Health and Human Services, which is over most of child care, so 0 to 8, general educators, and the Office of Special Education Programs put together a federal policy. And the federal policy reactions were much the same of what we've heard at DEC. Yes, inclusion, but, right? Yes, inclusion, but do it right. Yes, inclusion, but demand high quality. Yes, inclusion, but. But because these 2 agencies are pushing inclusion in early care and education settings with appropriate services and supports, it helps push policy forward. We've seen some differences in some places with how structured, the funding's structured, with how staff is structured, with how pre-service is happening, the content of pre-service, etc. So the federal inclusion statement was important. So it's important for our governments to say, yes, this is what we believe should be happening. For our professional associations to then go to their members and see where they have agreement. And for all of us to listen to practitioners and families. So that's one of the things we look forward to in the next year or 2, sharing with all of you. And if you'd like to be a part of it, we can also find ways to do that too. So what do we say when we mean high-quality early childhood program? This is not a crowd that I probably have to say what that means, but I will. It means that it's inclusive of every child with disabilities, without disabilities, and their family. It means that policies and funding and practices ensure their full participation and success. And it means that we have high expectations for the children in those programs. We have high expectations of the professionals that serve them. It means that we have intentional promotion of participation in all learning and social activities. So it means that our curriculum needs to be intentionally designed. So we're usually talking about universal design for learning, thinking about the fact that every child is going to participate in learning and social activities. Every child's going to play with friends. Every child's going to play on the playground. Every child is going to play with whatever's going on in that room and learn whatever's going on in that room. But we also know that a high-quality early childhood program is facilitated by individual plans, individual accommodations, so that every child in that room, regardless of ability, regardless of intersection of all of the above, has a plan that works for them. It's also high quality. Early childhood is facilitated by using evidence-based practices, services, and supports. Now, there's a place that we've been struggling a bit. As we've talked about equity, we realize on self-examination that a lot of our research is anything but equitable. We look at the research behind assessments. They do not include the faces of many of the children that we serve. We look at the research behind interventions, and the same thing. So we have a hard time right now even using the word evidence-based practices. We've tended to start to use evidence-informed practices because we know the research is about children 0 to 8, and some families are included, but we know there's so many things not included, at least not intentionally pointed out. So there may have been the faces of all the children that we think about in the studies or development of the assessment, but nobody intentionally pointed that out, so we don't know. So we're really rethinking for now until we get better and more research, what does it mean to even say evidence-based services and supports? But we know that using the term evidence-based services and supports, which sits in our Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, means that it's not just research, that it's also wisdom of families and wisdom of the professionals who serve those families. So we're putting higher attention, higher intentionality, higher values on listening to all of the above. Not just listening, having families in the research with us, not just expanding which families and which children we're doing research to, but having families and children doing research with. So that's one of the shifts. Not just expanding the diversity of the professionals that we're doing research to, but expanding the diversity of the professionals we're doing research with. And it's our hope that moving forward in this way, we will be able to do a better job in the research, do a better job in the development of the curriculum and the assessments, and be able to say in the future, yes, those are evidence-based practices that we can stand behind. Not that we've abandoned that. We'll use what we have for now. But we use what we have, clearly saying to our folks, this is what we have, but we know it's not enough. So think more deeply. So we've asked people when they're using our assessment tools, please think about who's not represented when that assessment tool is put together, and how does that mimic the folks that you're serving, and take your own data. And we've said that about interventions, we've said that about everything. We're very transparent and very clear that we're in a time where we're questioning almost everything, and we want our folks to question it as well. High quality early childhood programs are meant to foster development, absolutely. To foster development in the way that it should be fostered for that individual child with that individual plan, given their individual characteristics. But also, high quality early childhood programs assure that those children in the classroom, all 12 or 15 that you're serving, that they're all focusing on relationships and interactions with the adults in the room, but most importantly, that we're focusing on friendships for every child in that room. Every child, whether they're have an intersectionality in terms of trauma, every child who may have an intersectionality of poverty, ability, focusing on the fact that friendship is critical. And I'd say beyond the early years, friendship is critical, way beyond that. And we know and we're hearing more about what loneliness does to our teens and our tweens and our adults. So we've put real focus on friendships and growing friendships in these early childhood years. And most importantly, a sense of belonging. Some of the faces that were brightening in the band that we just listened to, that's belonging. You could see in the face that this is my space, this is my place, I belong here. We want that sense for every child, for every family. And so how do we get that? How do we get beyond just words saying that? So that's what we've been trying to think a lot about. So again, we're encouraging family leaders. We're encouraging families whose voices we don't often hear from. Not the easy, accessible family who says, yes, I'll sign up and we can have conversations, but the families who work 2 jobs and have from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock at night open to maybe talk to you, and how do we get to them? The professionals who are so busy working that they would love to share with us, but we need to figure out how to let them truly believe that we want to hear what they have to say, because a lot of our practitioners especially don't believe that we want to hear what they have to say, we meaning the academic field, the researchers, because too often there's been such a gap between what they see every day and what they do every day and what we say in research. So we're trying to close that gap. We're trying to close that by bringing everybody together as a team. So we're working on that. We also think schools should be involved. Early care and education centers, elementary schools, wherever the child is. But of course the government, and I don't have a really important group on here, private entities. It may take more than the government to help fund what we need to fund, but we're developing a workforce for a lot of folks out there. So that's something we're trying to talk about as well. This is an investment in your business's future. So one of the things that we are also exploring, discussing, trying to figure out is, what does it look like when inclusion truly happens? What does it look like that children receive the services and supports they need within the general education classroom? One of the things we've been digging into a little bit more, Dr. Michael Gralnick did a keynote at DEC a couple of years ago, and he rolled out his framework for the design of inclusive community-based early childhood intervention programs. And it's some really strong work. And it replicates what I heard this morning from Dr. Sophia. It replicates thinking about how do we all do this together, bottom line. And how do we be good humans? That's a PEGI policy I haven't figured out how to enact yet. But how do we all be good humans and realize that we're here to support each other? So he really has a way that he's talked about community supports that support family-centered early intervention programs. There's a lot of talk about what family-centered means. So we're having discussions about that and policy-level discussions about that as well. Family-centered means we do with families, not to families. But also it means the professionals are part of the team. So kind of wrangling with that a little bit. He talks a lot about the integration of developmental and intervention and implementation science. Too often we silo all of those. I would put medical in there as well, though he puts them under different headings. But let's not silo the research and break the pieces of the child apart. Those are the conversations we're having. How do we integrate it all? How do we use the best implementation science to put the policies that we want to have happen and make sure that they actually happen? Again, that new dimension of family-centered practices. How do we actually develop a partnership with a family that makes sense to them? That we say to them, this is your life, this is your child, this is your family. What are your hopes and dreams? And how do we get there? And how do we get there together? And I know there have been people that talked about that, but it's still not at the policy level, that we're not doing 2 children in families. We're doing it with them. He also, and we're working on equity and a recognition that developmental and behavioral differences are an integral part of the human condition. In other words, we are working hard to fight ableism. We are working hard to make sure that people see the strengths of every human being, and that supports and services are just that, supports and services that any child in any family may or may not need at any given time. And sometimes they'll need more, and sometimes they'll need less. And that's the way to look at early childhood. And again, a re-recognition, because there's been some slippage, that families are best and first and the most space and place where learning starts, where development starts, where sense of belonging and community starts. And families are best supported by communities that wrap around them comprehensively just as early as possible. Families will always be there for the children that we serve. What are we doing to support our families? It's a great, I'll let you just read I'll read it. It's a great quote from Dr. Gralnick. The potential to advance our understanding of the meaning of family-centered practices in the context of a practice model compatible with an approach capable of integrating developmental intervention and implementation science, long plane trip. Implementation science can be truly transformative. And that's what we want to do. We want to be truly transformative. We want the data to move. We want the numbers to move. We need new and inventive and different ways of thinking about things. I saw some of that this morning in my tour, walking into the AI lab, the artificial intelligence lab, and the buses outside. Truly inventive ways to rethink how we open equitable opportunities for every child and every family. One of the things we've also been working on that really fits into everything I just talked about, but I invite you to read it. We don't have it translated yet, but anyone who's open to translating it, talk to me afterwards. But we call it a racial equity point of view. What it really is a theory of change. The theory of change that focuses on a recognition that we have to do things differently. In that theory of change, we use a specific definition of ableism that I wanted to share with you because I think it's incredibly important to hear, but I think it's more important to hear and perhaps integrate it somewhere in your mind. But we use the definition of ableism from Talia Lewis. And it says that a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, in anti-blackness, in misogyny, in colonialism, in imperialism, and capitalism. The systemic oppression leads to people and society determining people's value based on their culture, language, appearance, religion, birth or living place, health, wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, excel, or behave. And you don't have to experience a disability to experience ableism. So the racial equity point of view hits hard at ableism, right? Hits hard on oppression that determines one's value based on who you are, your actual identity, and the intersectionalities that you experience. And so everything we just talked about in high quality early childhood education really, we hope, gets pushed by this racial equity point of view. It's being taken to our professionals through a professional association. It is being part of anything that we develop in our organization, folks have to use this, this theory of change. And so we move forward with that, and we hope that it's a way in really integrating it into the work we do. It's a way to integrate it into the hearts and the minds of the folks that are doing the work. A clicker. We spent a lot of time the last few years asking ourselves, how is power operating? How is power operating in early childhood education? How is power operating in the things that we have put out to guide our field? Do we have, and we found out in our audit that power was not operating in the way that it should. We had a lot of things to fix. We still have a lot of things to fix, but this is what we're committed to. We've asked the field of early intervention, early childhood special education, early childhood to commit to a growth mindset, to center the wisdom of families who are receiving the services. And we've seen a big change in the work that we do. It's only been about a year. But when we force that's not a good word, when we promote the idea of centering family voices, we're hearing entirely different things and hearing it from entirely different voices. And it is helping us with that growth mindset about the work that we do. We're helping people have tools that can help them utilize racial equity forward questions, such as, how is power operating? Who do you see in this room? And again, when we say racial equity, I should say, better way to think about it is intersectionality. It's race plus, right? Race plus any intersectionality that has systemic challenges to your sense of belonging. So we're helping folks have tools so that they can help ask the questions they need to ask, and commit to examining both visible and invisible barriers. And probably any system, like our system, most of the barriers were invisible. People will tell you, yes, I believe every child should have equal opportunity. Yes, I believe every family has strengths. And then you dig in, and that's not necessarily true. But it's invisible and it's underground. So we're providing the field with tools to look at their own bias. Do you have a bias that's in relation to families that are in poverty, to single parent families, to families that are LGBTQ+? Do you have a bias when it becomes a boy child who has lots of energy? What are your biases? Because those are our challenges and those are the barriers we need to get rid of. We're helping the field be able to use their own voice. Priority before we do anything in anything that we're involved in is listen to the voice of the family first, and second, the practitioners. And especially diverse families and diverse practitioners. So you look at our history, we haven't heard a lot from either group. To facilitate collaboration wherever we can, there's too few of us and too much work to do. And so why wouldn't we bring in families? Why wouldn't we bring in practitioners? And one of the reasons we're here today is we want to leverage partnerships internationally to help expand the work that needs to be done. I read you the definition of ableism a little early, but we truly believe that the folks in our pre-service programs need to learn early what is ableism, what is intersectionality, and have a strong definition of inclusion. Because if you don't understand the goal, you don't understand the work, and you can't do the work. So we're really trying to develop a system that addresses some things that have not been addressed before. We found through some of the work that we need to add ethics to that. Somewhere along the line, our pre-service programs are, and when I say pre-service, I should say the whole system. We think about pre-service and in-service and anywhere you're going to get extended learning. This needs to occur. And so folks need to think about how they are before they think about what they do, because it influences what they do is how they are. That makes sense, hopefully. But we know that ableism is a detriment to inclusion, because if you're an ableist, you don't believe that child truly belongs in your classroom. or you don't believe that the general education classroom teacher can truly support every child in every family. And then when you add intersectionality, it puts up a lot of barriers to inclusion. Again, centering the wisdom of families, the voices of lived experiences in the system are incredibly important. We talk to each other a lot, and it's a silo that keeps clapping for each other and telling each other, good job, that's a great idea, let's do that, without asking families. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And so we're really trying to bring up the wisdom of the families. Does this make sense? I remember probably the way that I learned it the most. A family told me, my team went in, early intervention program. They provided a routine-based interview, best ever, trained by Robin McWilliams. We were good at it. You know what we forgot to do? We forgot to tell the family exactly why we were asking those questions. Because we assumed this was a family that would just understand why we were asking the questions. White, middle class, college educated, you name it. I got a call from that mom 2 days later, and she said, you know, I cried all night that night. I told my mom they're probably going to come take my daughter away. Her young daughter, who she'd just adopted that year, who had a lot of service and support needs. She said, I know I didn't answer any of those questions right. Wow, what powerful learning from the voice of a family. Now, if we don't integrate that learning into pre-service and professional development, then we're not ever going to get where we need to get. So we're really focusing on our folks thinking about those type of things. It's one thing to have this nice system that we think works. It's another thing to figure out what it looks like on the ground and what we've missed. So our families and our practitioners are helping us with that. We're going to talk a bit about standards. Let me do a time check, though. I can talk too long, if you let me. Okay. I can't see my time. 1:59. Somebody tell me if we're halfway? 2 minutes? Oh my gosh. Okay. Talk to me about standards later. They're really important because if you don't give guide rails, people are going to go off the cliff. That's the easiest way to explain standards, right? And if you're lucky enough to have a place where guidelines can be mandated, that would be the loveliest of lovely things, right? We're working hard to get people to do them. But the thing we're proud of is our new standards have child development in them. And the first set of standards we know about that really focuses on not just partnering with families, but making sure families are part of everything we do from assessment. Families are part of everything we do from assessment to intervention. This is the last thing I'll leave you with. We have 6 themes in those standards, and I think those 6 themes really round up the work that we do. Families are partners in decision making. We must respect diversity. Equity has to be in place for all children and families. Individually, developmentally, age and functionally appropriate intervention and instruction must occur for every child. Partnerships and collaborations are critical, and we have to figure out what technology can do to support us as we move forward without losing the criticalness of relationships at an early age. Because we know that in and of itself, that interaction between parent and child, the interaction between parent and caregiver is critical to their development as well. So with that, there's a lot more probably in the PowerPoint. I invite you to, I have an open policy, so if you have any questions, my email's there as well. And I hope that we get a chance to have discussions and help move these critical ideas forward together, because that's the only way that we'll do it. I am going to go forward to say goodbye and a thank you. So, thank you.
네, 패기 캠프 박사님께